This is the Spring 2013 College of Liberal Arts and Sciences Dean's Lecture here tonight. I'm Beate Schmidtmann. I'm the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you here tonight for this event. The very, very first thing I want to do is I want to thank some people. And to begin with, I want to thank the ISU Lectures program, which is really incarnated by Pat Miller. Pat Miller, where are you? I mean, they do an absolutely wonderful job putting this event together and sponsoring it together with the college. The second person I want to thank is the event organizer for LAS, for the college, Laura. Laura is the person who, along with Pat, is most responsible for putting together such a nice event for us here tonight. Tonight's lecture is the 14th in the Dean's Lecture Series, which was inaugurated in 2006 by my predecessor, former Dean Mike Whiteford. The lectures highlight faculty excellence and achievement in teaching, discovery, and outreach in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. So you see our best and brightest in this particular series. The most outstanding members of our LAS faculty have been invited to present lectures from their own varied areas of expertise. And these lectures, and I hope tonight is going to be another example, stimulate discussion among our faculty, staff, students, and members of the Greater Iowa, Ames, Des Moines community who are going to be here tonight. Tonight's lecture is a first. It's a double feature. So we actually have two speakers. Diane Bystrom, director of the Carrie Chapman Catt Center for Women in Politics, and Stefan Schmidt, University Professor of Political Science. They'll give us a double feature. The setup here is a little bit different. It's sort of kind of like a little bar table and seats. And we hope that this particular event will be just as informative as previous presentations. Bystrom and Schmidt will present the good, the bad, and the ugly of the 2012 elections. And they just told us in a little private event beforehand that they're not going to rehash things, but they're going to tell us about some of the interesting and funky and strange things that happened, which will serve as lectures for the next season. Funny, embarrassing, or weird moments, says my script. Diane Bystrom has studied political campaigns for more than 25 years. She's a frequent commentator. She's interviewed a tremendous amount, especially on women in politics. If anything is going on in Iowa or in the broader country, Diane Bystrom is a frequent participant in interviews. She focuses on the styles and strategies used by female and male political candidates and how they're covered by the media. And she's led the Catt Center as a very dynamic director since 1996. Stefan Schmidt is probably the person who's most interviewed on this whole campus, maybe the person who's most interviewed in town. I think the folks in Des Moines have to work hard to get anywhere close. He's known as Dr. Politics and is the co-author of the best-selling textbook, American Government and Politics Today. And he was kind enough to send me a copy of his recent edition, and I'm studying for the test. He joined Iowa State's Political Science Department in 1970. He's been with us for a long time, always inspiring. He's a frequent guest on public radio, has become one of the most quotable political science experts in the media on U.S. presidential elections. Please join me tonight in welcoming the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences Spring 2013 Dean's Lecture Series speakers, Diane Bystrom and Stefan Schmidt.
Well, thank you all very, very much, and Dean Schmidtmann in particular for this honor and opportunity. She's already thanked the same people that are on our list to thank, so let's roll, as they say. One of the things we want to do here is to look at some events from the campaign and the election of 2012 and draw some lessons from those as a way of looking forward to the next presidential election, which is more or less underway already, the 2016 one. We called it the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we wanted to remind you that that came from some particular place. And so in honor of that, we thought we would start with someone who is generally thought to have been a very major player in this election.
So, Mr. President, how do you handle promises that you made when you were running for election, and how do you handle it? I mean, what do you say to people? Do you just, I know people were wondering, you don't have it. Okay. Well, I know even some of the people in your own party were very disappointed when you didn't close Gitmo. And I thought, I think closing Gitmo, why close that? We spent so much money on it. But I thought maybe it's an excuse. What do you mean, shut up?
Well, you'll all remember this particular event at the Republican National Convention. And we think that there's a lesson to be learned there. And the lesson is never overshadow the main speaker. Because after this happened, Mitt Romney spoke, and there was no longer any interest in Mitt Romney. All the buzz in the media and the talk was about this particular wonderful discussion. You remember June of 2011? The Iowa caucuses, the straw poll. Well, the lesson from it is early polls are really worthless because former Pennsylvania Senator Rick Santorum got 4% and was in 7th place. And of course, we know that he tied for first place in the actual Iowa caucuses. And a little bit later during the Ames straw poll in August, Michelle Bachmann was the top winner with 28% and Ron Paul with 27%. And we all know that they did not go on to get the nomination and that their campaigns essentially sort of fizzled out at the end. So early polls are really not a very good indicator of what's going to happen later.
Well, as Dean Schmidtman said, one of the things I do a lot is study media coverage of male and female candidates, and I actually have a study underway with Professor Daniela Dimitrova at Iowa State on television coverage of the candidates in the early phase. But this is actually from newspaper coverage, and it was done by the Pew Center on the media. And I think the interesting thing is, as Stefan pointed out, the polls are really kind of worthless at the beginning. And one of the things that happened in the Republican side this past cycle is that there were so many candidates that the news coverage just kind of, fluctuated. And this is actually an early snapshot in which you can see this is May 2nd through October 9th. And what you see on there is that Rick Perry, who we know, all of us in the room who followed the election went down in flames shortly after this time, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But Rick Perry was actually getting the most coverage, followed by Romney, who was pretty consistent over time, pretty steady on to the actual nomination. But then you look at those next two names, and it's Michelle Bachmann and Sarah Palin, who actually wasn't a declared candidate. But, interest in those two women was really fairly high. Poor Ron Paul, even though he was really doing quite well and he was second in the Ames straw poll, really never broke through on that media coverage, and that really plagued his campaign, as well as Rick Santorum. So they just really couldn't break through. So this gives you a snapshot of who was getting the coverage. The other thing I think is Tim Pawlenty. He spent a lot of time in Iowa, again, not getting a lot of coverage. And so again, Perry with the most coverage, he jumped in right after the Ames straw poll. Romney pretty steady, didn't come to the Ames straw poll, and then Bachmann and Palin. So really from female versus male perspective on coverage, both those candidates got quite a bit of coverage. And this really, I think, is interesting, too. It comes out of the same study, so it's the same time period. But it really is looking at, instead of the good, the bad, and the ugly, this is the good, the bad, and the neutral. And so this is media coverage primarily of newspapers. And then, again, you see that the person who got the best coverage in that time period was Rick Perry, got the most coverage. But look who got the worst coverage. It was actually President Obama. And so he got the worst coverage, followed by Newt Gingrich was actually got the worst, next most negative coverage, and then Tim Pawlenty at the bottom as well. But then looking at the positive coverage, again, you've got Rick Perry and you've got Michelle Bachmann and Sarah Palin. And so again, I think that was really interesting to see where that coverage is coming from in that early campaign. So this is through October 9th.
Here is a small picture of the people who wanted to be president on the Republican side. I couldn't get them all in, so we had to crop it off. And you remember that it was a tremendous abundance of very interesting people with diverse backgrounds. And really the lesson, the takeaway is too many people, too divisive, bad blood, and bad for the end results to some extent, partly because each of these people said something really nasty about the next person, and the Obama administration and the Democrats were able to piggyback on those negative comments and essentially drive into the ground a lot of the candidates and even Mitt Romney. So too many people is not really a good thing.
And if you don't remember, there were actually 18 debates over the course of 8 months on the GOP side, the most ever. And they've already talked about they're not going to have this many debates the next cycle because people just attacked each other. It wound up in ads on the Democratic side. So, my question is, with studying debates from that communication perspective that I come from, is that what did we really learn? The first cartoon I chose, we learned a lot about tax cuts, big tax cuts, humongous tax cuts, ginormous tax cuts, and then the moderator says, hey, wait, I haven't even asked a question yet. And so the other cartoon talking about those reruns and it's another GOP debate, it's another rerun. We picked out some highlights of 3 debates that we want to talk a little bit about, and they're very brief highlights. The first one is from one of the first debates in New Hampshire, and June 13th, 2011, New Hampshire, another big state, like Iowa in that process. So this is, see what you learned from this debate. Really, really
Leno
piercing
or
questions.
Conan? Elvis or Johnny Cash? Dancing with the Stars or American Idol? BlackBerry or iPhone? Now imagine you're getting to the barbecue joint. Maybe it's here in New Hampshire, maybe it's South Carolina, ordering some wings. Spicy or mild? Coke or Pepsi? Deep dish or thin crust?
Deep dish. Any one of the people on this stage would be a better president than President Obama.
Has he done one thing right when it comes to the economy in this country?
Boy, that's a tough question.
The programs that President Obama has put forward haven't really worked. They've been a failure. They've been slow.
President Obama is a one-term president.
The next clip we selected, I don't know how many of you went, there was a debate in Ames on August 11, 2011, shortly before the Ames straw poll, and this is one of my favorite moments from that debate.
Next, we're going to go to Representative Bachmann. In 2006, when you were running for Congress, you described a moment in your life when your husband said you should study for a degree in tax law. You said you hated the idea. And then you explained, quote, "But the Lord said, be submissive. Wives, you are to be submissive to your husbands." As president, would you be submissive to your husband?
For that question, Byron.
You're welcome.
Marcus and I will be married for 33 years this September 10th. I'm in love with him. I'm so proud of him. And both he and I, what submission means to us, if that's what your question is, it means respect. I respect my husband. He's a wonderful, godly man and a great father, and he respects me as his wife. That's how we operate our marriage. We respect each other, we love each other, and I've been so grateful that we've been able to build a home together. We have 5 wonderful children and 23 foster children. We built a business together and a life together, and I'm very proud of him.
All right. Thank you, Representative.
Now, it's kind of interesting because afterwards there were a lot of people that commented that she struggled to come up with her answer. I don't think she struggled at all. I think she paused. In good communication, people know that, don't they, Dr. Slagle? She paused and let the audience boo the moderator, and then she smiled and said, "Thank you for that question," and answered it. So I actually thought that was one of the best questions that she actually handled in that debate. Here's a similar side, but it's a male being asked about his personal life. This is Newt Gingrich in South Carolina, CNN.
As you know, your ex-wife gave an interview to ABC News and another interview at the Washington Post, and this story has now gone viral on the internet. In it, she says that you came to her in 1999, at a time when you were having an affair. She says you asked her, sir, to enter into an open marriage. Would you like to take some time to respond to that?
No, but I will. To take an ex-wife and make it 2 days before the primary a significant question in a presidential campaign is as close to despicable as anything I can imagine. My two daughters.
Do we have a takeaway?
I think so. Well, the takeaway for this one is that if you confront the media and play to the audience, you always win. Because Newt Gingrich, in his entire campaign, really played to the audience, and he did it by attacking whoever the moderator was and essentially responding as he did here. And I think that was a very interesting development, something new in the way American political campaigns and debates were run. Because normally you respect the media, you fear them, and so on. In the Republican primaries, nobody feared the media. In fact, they found them to be very nice playthings for their campaign. Oh, this is mine here. Rick Perry jumped right up in the polls. People thought this is the guy that is going to really be able to beat Obama, and then this happened.
Gold is good. If you've got any in the backyard, because, you know, if they print any more money over there in Washington, the gold's going to be good. Mine's cut, balance, and grow. Get that. Yeah. It's pretty simple, actually. Or you can stay in the old system that's out there. And then, Senator, you know, the ones that want to stay in the old system, pay the lawyers, pay the accountants, all that money that's gone, or that 20% flat tax, put it on there, take your deductions off, send it in. Even Tim Geithner can get his taxes in on time with this, I'm telling you.
Well, that was a very interesting incident, and I think we have a takeaway. And the takeaway is don't take pain medication before a debate, because people thought he was drunk. They couldn't figure out what was going on. It turns out he has a back problem, and he had taken a few too many pain medications and was obviously really happy that evening.
Now we're going to talk about the next unforgettable takeaway of the campaign, and that was just the number of ads that ran. Actually, there were more than 1 million television ads that ran in this presidential election cycle, and many of those ran in the state of Iowa. We were a top 10 state targeted for advertising. So if you study political ads like I do, that was pretty exciting, but I'm sure most of you probably got sick of them over time. I have a couple of cartoons there, and one of them you can't see very well, but as a former newspaper reporter, and a shout out here to publisher or Alexander Hain over here. The first one was two people watching TV saying and on the TV it says it's time to take back our country. Honey, give me the remote. Some billionaire spent millions on that ad to influence our votes. So do you realize how important that makes us? Democracy requires informed citizens. The least we can do is to turn off the TV and read a newspaper. So I had to say that. And then I like the other ad because I don't really think this referred to Terry Branstad, but he did talk a lot about pink slime during the election cycle in Meat, and that's pink slime coming out of the TV, and I see the political ads have started. So we're going to show you some of our favorite political ads, and they're hopefully ones that you didn't see a lot in Iowa. So I think, Steph, you have you have the first ad. Should be coming up. Yep.
All right. So what you have to do is when you watch the ad, at the end of the ad, look for Sasquatch. This is a Ron Paul ad for president.
Is this dude serious? Fiscal conservative? Really? Santorum voted to raise the debt ceiling 5 times, doubled the size of the Department of Education, then supported the biggest entitlement expansion since the 60s. Not Ruby. Santorum voted to send billions of our tax dollars to dictators in North Korea and Egypt, and even hooked Planned Parenthood up with a few $million. Rick Santorum, a fiscal conservative? Fake.
I'm Ron Paul, and I approve this message.
There was Sasquatch at the end. I hope you saw him.
And actually, although we didn't see a lot of the Ron Paul ads here, he didn't run as many in our market as other markets. He actually had the edgiest and most original ads of all the Republican candidates. There were actually quite a few media interviews I did about his advertising. And so he had a young advertising guy. A lot of his ads were that kind of style, just this really edgy style that really attracted a lot of his young voters. Now, I picked out the next 3 ads. I'm going with an animal theme for them in honor of my daughter, who's a vet med student at Iowa State, who couldn't be with us tonight because she's at her llama class. I hope there's a big
we don't
bucks
have
in that.
llamas
we don't
in
have
this
llama,
thing.
but she's
No.
studying llamas,
Sorry
and so
about
she's
that.
doing it. So I picked, these are, the first 2 are lower level congressional races, and the first one is called Pigs, and it's by Ted Yoho, who ran for Congress in Florida. No.
He should have.
Yeah, we love
Career politicians, they're like pigs feeding at the trough. Career politicians got us in this mess, but all they do is throw mud at each other. I'm Ted Yoho. I'm a conservative businessman and a veterinarian. The career politicians have given us $16 trillion in debt. It's time for new leadership. I'll repeal Obamacare and balance the budget. And after 8 years in Washington, I'll come home. Let's put the mudslinging aside, run the pigs out of the trough, and put America first. I'm Ted Yoho, and I approve this message. How about you?
The next ad I actually found on Facebook. I became accustomed to it on Facebook. It was run on my Facebook wall one day, and it's also a congressional race. It's a little bit longer. It's called The Donkey Whisperer. And it takes a while to start this one.
A little bit.
Yeah.
You're not a victim. You're a patriot. You're an opportunist. Let's take advantage of it, okay?
They don't listen to me. You know, I've been talking to these guys forever, and they still do not listen. Believe it.
You know, all these guys want is they want more shelter. They want more feed. But yet the government's making it harder on me. They're taxing me to death. I can't afford to build that. When I don't build it, they think I owe it to them. See, all you guys want, you want a handout. I don't have something in it, now you're getting mad again, okay? Years ago, we didn't have this problem. But now it's just a hassle to get them to do anything. Don't turn your head. I know you're embarrassed because you're part of the problem, all right? But we can turn it around. These donkeys don't live in the United States of France. They live in the United States of America. They're going to have to get with it. You all heard me talk about the Constitution. Have you ever heard of the Constitution? It's a great document. They keep thinking that Obama's going to take care of them, that Obama's going to feed them, Obama's going to build their barn. Look, if I can get Obama out of health care and we start that, I can get these teeth fixed that you got, okay? I can get them fixed, all right? But he's got to get away. He's got to let me do the things I need to do. See those big ears? Still can't hear me. Unbelievable.
You have to wait until the elephants.
I got to tell you guys something. I'll be honest with you. It's a lot easier to feed elephants than it is donkeys. Okay? And if I have to trade you in for elephants, I'll do it.
Okay, we wanted to be fair and balanced, but quite frankly, it was very hard finding funny Democratic ads. There was hardly any. It seemed like the Republican conservatives were more likely to be funny than any Democrats. So I chose the Obama Big Bird ad. It actually ran in Iowa. So this is my Obama animal ad, Big Bird,
I'm
and
Barack
it came after a
Obama, and I
debate.
approve this message. Bernie Madoff, Ken Lay, Dennis Kozlowski, criminals, gluttons of greed, and the evil genius who towered over them. One man has the guts to speak his name. Big Bird, Big Bird, Big Bird. It's me, Big Bird. Big, yellow, a menace to our economy. Mitt Romney knows it's not Wall Street you have to worry about. It's Sesame Street. I'm going to stop the subsidy to PBS. Mitt Romney taking on our enemies no matter where they nest.
Our final ad, I'm going to give all the credit to Stefan. I'm not sure I would have chose this ad. It is funny, but it's another congressional ad, I believe, out of Texas as well. He was actually
very tasteful.
He actually ran for the Railroad Commission, which is very powerful.
The Railroad Commission in Texas is the most important political position, more important than the governor. And so this is what this gentleman was running for.
It's called Electric Fence.
Will Rogers said there are 3 kinds of men. The one that learns by reading, the few that learn by observation, and the rest have to pee on an electric fence.
We've seen it over and over. Politicians run for office for personal gain, and
and don't know how to make hard decisions. With recent bailouts, unemployment, and debt, they clearly don't have the experience needed to lead our country. My name is Roland Sledge, and I've spent 35 years working in the oil and gas business. I have the experience needed to bring Texas jobs. Isn't it about time we elected political leaders that have sense enough not to pee on electric fences?
Roland Sledge, the Texas Railroad Commission.
Roland Sledge.
Yeah, I thought the takeaway is that all politics is really local, and the more interesting things are happening at the local level and state level where people are running for office. There's a lot more humor there and a lot more sort of effort to connect with your local voting clientele. This is mine as well. This was the first presidential debate. You can see the headline says, "Man Down, President Barack Obama blows the first presidential debate." And the narrative was the president looked down at his notes, doodled around the edges, nodded absently as Romney struck blow after blow. Romney went so far as to compare President Obama to one of his sons. "Look, I've got 5 boys. I'm used to people saying something that's not always true, but just keep repeating it and ultimately hoping I'll believe it. But that's not the case." So this was a bad start for President Obama.
And although the debates were actually watched by a huge viewing audience, there were 3 presidential debates, and the vice presidential debate, actually the viewership was down after 2008, mainly because of the vice presidential debate, because there was so much interest in the Biden-Palin debate. But the other thing I think, that I like to look at when you study the media is now those of us who study the media not only study what we call the traditional media, but the non-traditional media. And certainly non-traditional media, and what is really a source, especially with young people, is what we would call social media or entertainment media. So in addition to what we learned in the debates, we also learned a lot during parodies. So I had never heard of bad lip reading, and I would encourage you to check out their website because it's really pretty funny. Again, I discovered it on Facebook. Apparently this is where I'm getting a lot of my information these days. But this is the first debate parody, and we have a short clip of it. But it's on a website. This organization is Bad Lip Reading, and they don't do just politics. They have all sorts of things.
But they poisoned it. I know, right? I know. Sing me some harmonies. It's a small picture in a shop somewhere, and I know who it is. It's Mormon Judy and cow people.
A little bitchy, but good stuff.
Governor Romney's black. I think black can be judged. How do I do this? Dude, I don't have a jet ski. Not the kind you're talking about. Plus, everyone can see that I'm not black. This isn't scientific stuff. I heard there's not going to be a test. But, I do want you to support me and be my man.
That's beautiful.
I know he's black.
Ahmed, how did you know about whodunit in the lounge?
I didn't know.
Oh, you didn't? Oh, well, they started clapping for the mad cow until someone sold him. And then when he died, they had him stuffed, like that water buffalo. Stuffed.
That dude's the sickest. We hate him because he had eggs for a bath. Gonna throw up tonight.
But if you throw up, then it's as a jealous woman.
In horrible weather, I sneeze and I just lose the puppets. I'm thinking Governor Romney won't do that, okay? And this has gotten me thinking. I see a purple idiot. Speaks German with a big, spunky Irish Labradoodle puppy.
Oh, he got me. And I want you to feel bad because I've got funny radiation coming up on my
Come on, I'm not a robot,
much.
okay? I wish. Then I could go higher and you could rotate my arm and send me whooshing into space. Can you hear me?
Now, Matt, shush, because the sofa bears don't know. Go right off, and I'll defeat 17 bears while you're gone. But first, I want you two to turn and look at each other. Yeah. Oh, now that's nice. Just stare deeply into each other's eyes. Yeah. Good. Now say the first thing that pops into your brain.
I don't want to touch sandpaper. I like the whiz.
Okay, all right. Now I want to try something.
Well, this obviously goes on and on and on. It's actually the whole debate, and it really is pretty funny. The other one that we picked, most of us see our parodies, I think, a lot on Saturday Night Live. This next one is a Saturday Night Live, just a clip of a parody on the debate hosted by Candy Crowley. Actually, the Cat Center hosted Candy Crowley about a week after the election, and she talked a lot about her role in that debate. If you don't remember, she actually at the end became kind of a focus of the debate because she was seen to maybe correct Mitt Romney and not in the debate that actually came up the questioning of Candy Crowley. So this is a clip of a parody clip of that moment at the debate.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
I jumped the gun.
Good evening from Hofstra University in Hempstead, New York. I'm Candy Crowley from CNN State of the Union.
We're skipping forward here to the part we want.
That's Tom Hanks, if you don't recognize him, with his question.
Libya. You know, I'm glad you brought Libya, because Governor Romney wants to politicize Libya. In the same way, he wants to politicize my handling of the economy. Governor Romney wants to politicize things so much that sometimes it makes me feel like he and I are both politicians. You got a problem?
Yeah, I got a problem. I want to know why it took you so long to call the attack in Benghazi a terrorist act.
I said that the day after.
No, you didn't.
Yes, I did.
No, you didn't.
Yeah, I did.
No, in fact, I am willing to bet, here and now, that you have never, in your life, even once, used the phrase terrorist act.
I'll get the transcript. Get it.
Governor, he has, in fact, used the phrase terrorist act.
Candy, no. Candy, come on.
I'm afraid he did.
Candy, please. Candy. Oh, Candy, come on.
And that concludes tonight's debate. From all of us here at Hofstra University, thank you, and live from New York, it's Saturday!
Oh, yeah. So, anyway, Obama recovered from his first disastrous debate, and the parodies probably helped him to some extent because Mitt Romney was fairly easy to make fun of, and I think this sort of is an illustration of how the media used those fictional scenarios to actually interject themselves into the 2012 election. Seriously now, one of the things that happened, we now know, is that President Obama won 71% of the Hispanic vote. I'm one of the first German Hispanics to be hired at Iowa State. I am a Hispanic. I grew up in Colombia, South America, so I qualify. I have a card in my wallet. And Hispanics now are 10% of the American voters in this last election, and obviously a growing demographic. And I guess can you say self-deportation, which was a phrase that Mitt Romney coined and that haunted him and followed him wherever he went, and is, as you will see in a few minutes, still a phrase that's used to kind of say the Republicans are not on board on knowing how to bring back Hispanic voters to the Republican Party. So this is the cartoon Mitt Romney, ¿Qué pasa, amigos?, with his baseball bat, and the Hispanics are a piñata that Mitt Romney apparently has just whacked. This is mine too? Well, everybody loves Joe Biden, and Joe Biden loves Debbie. I'll read it to you at the bottom there. He was at an event with the Democratic National Committee Chair, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and he said, I want to go public with this. He put his arm around her and he said, I love this woman, which is a kind of Joe Biden sort of event. And the takeaway in the larger sense, now we're going to get a little serious, is gender and politics. Watch out what you say. It's very important.
Well, like Stefan is Hispanic, I'm a woman, so I feel qualified to talk about women voters. But I'm also going to tie in Latino and African American voters. I think this is really interesting. We're going to have a couple of slides that are going to show you where the vote totals were coming from, broken down by gender, race, ethnicity, and also age. And kind of looking at this changing demographic. And again, was it just unique to 2012? Is this the way we're going? I mean, I think Stefan and I think we're proceeding in this direction. So what you basically see here is the white versus the non-white vote, and of course Romney is red and Obama is blue. And so what you see with white voters, especially male voters, 62% of them voted for Governor Romney and just 35% for Obama. The gap is a little bit smaller among women, but still a gap there. So white women and white men did vote for Romney, not in huge percentages. Now look at the non-white vote. In those first two columns, the first is African American men, which is just 3% or 11% of black men voted for Romney. Even fewer black women, just 3%, with 96% of them voting for Obama. Then the next two are Latino men and Latino women. Again, men of Latinos voting for Romney a little bit more than women. And then the other is all other races and ethnicity. So you see this huge, I think, it really shows the big difference in the changing demographics in this country and where vote totals are going for Democrats and Republicans. The next one focuses basically on age. And again, what you see there's a lot of discussion about age as well. And what you'll see there when you look at that red graph there, which is Governor Romney, you see he gets the most support with 65 and older, then a little bit more with a little bit less with 50 to 64. Then by the time you're in the 40 to 49 group, it's a 2% difference. And then when it switches down to people 39 and younger, you're getting less and less support, going down to the youngest voters, which are in that 18 to 29 age group, where 60% of them voted for Obama. So again, now there have been previous studies that show that we get more conservative over time, so it's going to be hard to kind of see how this happens. But we're already seeing, I think, the results of this with things like gay marriage. I mean, just 4 years ago, there were states that actually voted to ban gay marriage. In this last cycle, it actually either failed in states or, that's an issue, again, being pushed, I think, by young people of both political parties, that there's a big difference in how they feel about that issue compared to older people. The next one then looks at age by race and ethnicity. And again, you see kind of the same thing. The white voters are on the far left, and so you see that still white young people voted for Romney in slightly more margins than Obama. But then when you look at African Americans and blacks and Latinos, again, that huge disparity among young people and who they vote for. So again, we do have a population that's growing more and more minority-based. Latinos are the largest growing minority in the country, and again, they had voted Republican in 2000 and also in 2004, and now they're strongly shifting the other way, at least in this last election. This was a really cool thing that I found also, and what it does is that if you have Obama, those blue lines, this breaks everything down by CNN exit polling, and it's too little for you to read, but if you just look at the blue going down, the top line is where Obama got most of his support for, going down to the bottom, and then Romney's the other. He comes red on up. And just to summarize it, the top categories in that top portion for Romney are for Obama are black women, black men, Latino women, gays, single women, and Latino men. So again, it goes down, and there's other groups that voted for him. Actually, the first religious group that kind of registers on there are either no religion or Jewish women, or white Jewish and all Jewish people, and then people who don't go to church at all. So those are the kind of religious things there. Romney, his top, and that's at the bottom, that are Mormons. That's the percentage of Mormons that voted for him, not surprisingly, because he is a Mormon. White Protestants, white men, white Catholics, white women. So again, that really, I think, shows another way about how the vote totals are different. These two men basically based on ethnicity. We're going to now switch to Senate races. So.
Yeah, we're going to talk about something that has, like a comet, a relatively long tail, because this is still an issue in the United States, and the Republicans are talking about this even in regard to the Iowa Senate race that's coming up in terms of who might be a good candidate. Representative Todd Akin of Missouri, of course, said it seems to be, first of all, from what I understand from doctors, it's really rare for rape to result in pregnancy. If it's a legitimate rape, the female body has ways to try to shut the whole thing down. And you'll remember that. And what that and several other inappropriate and politically disastrous statements by Republican Senate candidates has produced is a new Republican group called the Conservative Victory Project, which is going to try to stop candidates like Akin or candidates whom this particular group, which is led by some sort of Washington establishment Republicans, think that are going to be toxic candidates, and they're going to try and essentially fund alternatives to them. You can imagine at the local level in states that has produced a tremendous backlash against CVP by party conservatives and Tea Party conservatives especially. In the case of Iowa in particular, this group, CVP, is really worried about our Congressman Steve King running for Senate, and they have said that they are going to try to derail his candidacy and find someone else who is more electable, and that has already produced a lot of fireworks, and Terry Branstad, our governor, has made some comments about it, and it's pretty clear that the tension between those who want to interfere from the outside to essentially choose candidates who are more electable, and those who say, look, leave us alone, we don't want Washington establishment Republicans meddling in our affairs, is really producing an internecine war, a real split in the Republican Party, and some very deep tension that is going to play on really until the next election in 2014, and then beyond that, probably this will continue until 2016. So it's a very serious repercussion, and some of you probably read my article in the Des Moines Register about this, the sort of long-term consequences of this beyond a race for Senate in Missouri as a kind of national issue.
And this leads into something that we'll be looking at. Actually, I'm doing a book chapter with Dr. Valerie Hennings, who's here tonight as well, on the war on women rhetoric. And there was a lot of, did media interviews during this last cycle saying, is there a war on women? It was always debated, on the CNN and Fox and MSNBC. And I don't know if there's a war on women or not. I would tend to think that what I would say is that it was a very effective rhetorical strategy for Democrats. They were able to capture it. And as I told one reporter, it was a gift that kept on giving, because you had Todd Akin, and then you had Richard Murdoch, then you had Mitt Romney, binders full of women. So, they just kept on stepping in it. And the Republicans, the Democrats pounced on it. I've studied political ads since 1990, and this is really the first election cycle that I've seen a presidential candidate take out ads that mention even the word birth control and abortion. The first ad, Dangerous, is an Obama ad. It did run in Iowa. And
you want to read the captions for them, because they're kind of hard to read.
Yeah, it is kind of hard to read. It's a cartoon. Actually, there were some pretty gross ones that I didn't put in here. But the GOP, which is Elvin, yeah. And he says, if we were waging a war on women, I would have painted this little honey on the bomber, and it's a little misconception. And then the big bombs, the ones that really came up in with the Democrats were pay equity, Planned Parenthood, health care, and also anti-conception. So this first ad is an Obama ad. It's called Dangerous, and it did run in Iowa. So you may remember it.
I'm Barack Obama, and I approve this message.
Mitt Romney's position on women's health, it's dangerous.
Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan would get rid of Planned Parenthood funding and allow employers to deny coverage for cancer screenings and birth control.
We can't afford to let him take away our choices, to take away basic health care.
Both backed proposals to outlaw abortions, even in cases of rape and incest.
I don't think that women's health issues have faced a crisis like this in decades.
The next ad, we mentioned Todd Akin. He was actually ahead in the polls over Claire McCaskill, who's a moderate Democrat in Missouri, and she was the incumbent. As soon as he said the thing about legitimate rape, she took out a series of ads, all rape victims, two of whom are pro-life, and one of them is Joni, and they're very effective ads, turned the race around for her, and she won by 11 points.
I'm Claire McCaskill, and I approve this message.
Todd Akin apologized for implying there's such a thing as legitimate rape. He may have misspoken, but I do believe he showed his true colors and his true intent of what he intends to do if he's elected. Accepting his apology is up to you. I'm a pro-life mother and a survivor of an extremely violent sexual assault. As a woman of faith, I must forgive Todd Akin. But as a voter, it's not something I can forget.
And again, so that's forgive but not forget. And then this last ad, it really focuses on, I mean, Romney really didn't know how to respond. And he didn't respond to weeks to some of the ads Obama was running about, like the dangerous one. There was a whole series of ads about that featuring real people. So then the solution, I think, for Romney and the Republicans was, let's focus on the economy. And this was a pretty well-produced ad and really talks about, let's not focus on abortion and health care and contraception. Let's
Dear
focus
daughter,
on
welcome
economy.
to America. Your share of Obama's debt is over $50,000, and it grows every day. Obama's policies are making it harder on women. The poverty rate for women, the highest in 17 years. More women are unemployed under President Obama. More than 5.5 million women can't find work. That's what Obama's policies have done for women. Welcome, daughter.
I'm Mitt Romney, and I approve this message.
So, yes, the young people here probably won't remember, yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus, but anyway, yes, Virginia, there was a gender gap in 2012. There was a lot of misrepresentation of the gender gap in the media. Typically, it was reported as how women were going to vote for Romney and Obama. That is not the gender gap. Gender gap requires two genders, and that's the difference in that. First of all, I want to point out, though, that the turnout of women was once again larger than the turnout of men. It's been that way since 1980. Since 1968, greater numbers of women have voted, but women make up 51% of the population. In 1980, they also started voting in greater percentages in proportion to men. So if women make up 51% of the population, they were 53% of the electorate in the 2012 election. So millions more women vote than men, and that's why they're always focused on. The gender gap, as I just said, our definition of it in political science is it's the difference in the proportions of women and men voting for the same candidate, so two genders. And the gender gap was 10 percentage points, with 55% of women and 45% of men voting for Obama. He actually got about the same percentage of women in 2012 as he did in 2008, but the gender gap was bigger because he got less men in 2012. This was the largest gender gap since 1996. There's a flash there, yeah. It's larger than any year except 1996, which was 11 points, and that was favoring Bill Clinton over Bob Dole. And Republicans were able to keep the gender gap to about 7 points in 2004, and then actually it was just 7 points in 2008 as well. Stefan's running the slides, so I'm going to let him do it. Anyway, you also heard a lot about a marriage gap, and that is totally true, too. There's not just a gender gap, there's a marriage gap. Married women tended to vote in greater proportions for Mitt Romney, 53% compared to 46%. And when they asked in the exit polling by CNN what the top issues that they voted on, the Romney supporters talked about the economy and jobs. So that message was getting through to that constituency of voters. But look at unmarried women. 67% of them voted for Obama, just 31% of Romney. And the thing about single women is they're very diverse as far as a demographic. That could include single college women. It could include women who are widowed, divorced, retirees. I mean, just the whole gamut. And when they asked them what they cared about, again, look how the Democratic message is getting through. They wanted access to birth control. They wanted pay equity, and they wanted health care reform. So again, those messages were getting through to those constituencies. So takeaway. Women voters mattered, again, and a lot in 2012.
The Democrats had some problems as well, and of course now we're moving farther along the line. We're moving to the Democratic National Convention. They had a very big oops moment at that convention, and that is that they left out God and Jerusalem from their party platform. The takeaway is, in 2012, religion and Israel mattered. In 2016, religion and Israel will still matter, and you can't leave them out of your party platform. There is this close connection between the United States and Israel as a supporter and ally, and it was a strange moment, and I think the first time I've ever seen the party platform of a political party which did not mention God and didn't mention Israel and Jerusalem in particular, amended on the floor of the party with an open vote of all the delegates who were there at that time of the day. And if you recall the moment, it was awkward and dangerous because the audience didn't really want God and Jerusalem in the party platform. And so the moderator kept asking for a vote, and they say aye and nay, and clearly it was either evenly tied or most people said nay. And in the end, someone walked up to him and said, psst, psst, psst. And he called for another vote, and before people could even say anything, he said, the yeas have it, and God and Jerusalem are back in the party platform. They walked away, and a lot of people in the audience actually booed. Very, very awkward moment. Political parties have to have a lot more control over their party platform than either party had this year. That was a big takeaway. They both had terrible, terrible things going on when the party platform was written, things that the party activists who are much more sort of radical in their ideology might want in there, but that you don't want in your party platform when you're running in the general election.
Okay, our next, or I guess actually our last unforgettable, number 5, is the mad money raised and spent during the campaign. By the numbers, $6 billion was raised and spent on the presidential campaign. That's $700 million more than 2008. Outside groups, you heard a lot about Citizens United and all the outside money coming in, that Supreme Court case, $970 million by outside groups spent. Obama, money spent on his campaign, that would include his campaign, the Democratic National Committee, and outside money, $875. $30 million left from Romney's candidacy, and again, that was spent by his campaign, the RNC, and also outsiders. And I thought this was interesting. For every second that went by, $30 was being spent on each vote during the campaign. Other unforgettable numbers. 47%.
Yes. 47% was a number that will live in infamy, or in fame, if you wish. And of course, this is where Mitt Romney, at a private fundraiser in Boca, that's Florida for those of you who haven't been down there, said there are 47% of the people who will vote for the president no matter what, who are dependent on government and who believe that they are victims. These are people who pay no income tax. And so my job is not to worry about those people. The consequences of that were so great that when Mitt Romney did his first television interview just this week, Sunday night or Sunday, he mentioned the 47% and his lack of appeal to minority voters as the torpedoes that sank his campaign. An important message, even at a private fundraiser. Don't say things that are not going to look very good in the headlines and in the opposition party's political advertisements.
And then the other number we picked was 538. Does anybody know what 538 is? It's the number of electoral votes in the Electoral College. It's more than 535 because there's delegates' votes and that's Nate Silver's Political Caucus, Political Calculus blog for the New York Times. And the interesting thing about it is that he correctly predicted. We started out talking about polling. At the end, Nate Silver was dead on. He predicted the turnout in all 50 of 50 states. He was 49 of 50 in 2008. The interesting thing is, if you saw the political pundits on TV, they kept on criticizing Nate Silver. He actually uses something based on baseball. If you ever saw the movie Moneyball, it's that kind of a thing that he based his prediction on. But this was one of the comments I saw later, that political analysts were left reporting opinions while Nate Silver and others reported on research. And again, I think this is going to take polling to new levels, the research that Nate does. Obama's data operation, excellent. They're running thousands of models every night, predicting where the resources to go and putting the resources in those areas. Romney had something called Orca. It actually crashed the night of the election, and one of his assistants said that Orca was lying on the beach with a harpoon in it.
A great environmental tragedy.
Yeah.
Some of you know who Andy Borowitz is, and he had a nice column that ties in with what we're talking about now, which is Andy Borowitz actually had this thing that says National Rifle Association defends the right to own politicians. And he said, in testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee today, NRA CEO Wayne LaPierre warned that the NRA would vigorously oppose any legislation that, quote, limits the sale, purchase, or ownership of politicians. Politicians pose no danger to the public if used correctly, said Mr. LaPierre, who claims to have over 200 politicians in his personal collection. Everyone hears about the bad guys in Congress. Well, the only thing that stops a bad guy with a vote is a good guy with a vote. I'm proud to be the owner of many of those guys. And obviously that's a parody on the whole language about gun control and gun ownership and how it really is not very risky and very dangerous. It's a good thing. So one of the takeaways is this is all about money, right? The 2016 election is estimated to cost at least twice as much as the 2012 election. And of course, the race has already started. We are not predicting anything. There are a couple of names up there.
I chose a woman.
I chose a Hispanic or a Latino, and there's no bias involved. These two are obviously already huge subjects of speculation as to who each party may want to launch in the next election. But there was a little incident that is now called Watergate, and the reference here was muy caliente, or very hot. Let's just take a look at a couple of seconds of this.
And to bring word of this new accepting Republican Party, whose performance was perhaps too caliente. And suddenly, the night's big story was the self-deportation of Marco Rubio's saliva from the inside of his mouth to the outside of his face. No, don't wipe. Don't wipe. You're only drawing attention to the... Don't lunge at it. No! Don't... Oh! No! Why?
Yep.
I think we're done. Right?
Are we done?
We're done.
Oh,
I have one last takeaway.
This is so much fun. Are we really done?
You hit the last takeaway.
Well, the takeaway is this is a bad start for election 2016. Done? Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Diana and Stefan. This was great. You want to use this one?
Oh.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Diana and Stefan. I
Still
hope you
doesn't
enjoyed it very much. These reminiscences of some of the good and not so good ads that we were all exposed to not so long ago. We'll take a few questions, and what I would like to do is to start with the students. The students often hang back and don't ask questions until everybody else is about ready to leave, so I'm going to take the first 3 questions from students. Then we'll see how much time we have left. So who's going to be first? Okay, good one. I'll bring the mic.
You had briefly mentioned about social media affecting the election. I don't know, we've previously talked about how social media has affected campaigns. So could you describe in particular, the ages and how that affects social media and the presidential campaigns?
Well, actually, the use of social media by the youngest group of voters actually went down in 2012 from 2008 because they think that young people were less engaged than they were in 2008. They ended up turning out in pretty good proportions. The more interesting thing, I think, is that people in the more middle-aged group were using more social media. And certainly President Obama is the king of social media. On one slide, and I really didn't point it out, he spent about twice as much as Romney did on social media, and really with a targeting type thing. I mean, using Facebook, using Twitter, using things, messaging, texting you. And so, every time that you like his page, he has much more likes on Facebook than Romney had. And so every time you like someone on Facebook, of course, that collects a lot of information about you. So I think the Republicans are catching up with the Democrats, but certainly the Democrats, I think, I have an edge in social media.
Well, and Reince Priebus, who is the chair of the Republican National Committee, this last week said, we have to concentrate on building a political machine that uses data mining, not just social media, but it's also the entire networked system for data mining and also for driving information back to precinct workers of the political party so that they can actually identify individuals, register them to vote, and on election night, the crucial moment when Orca went down, the precinct workers for the Republican Party really couldn't get information about which Republicans hadn't voted so that they could go and turn them out. So it's the entire platform, essentially, of networked information that is going to be the next really, really huge thing, and it was already in 2012.
Okay, got a question? Oh, yeah. Wow. You were first.
Do you guys want to talk about third rail politics, kind of like taboo subjects that it seems like both of the parties don't really talk about, specifically defense for the Democrats and Medicare and Medicaid for the Republicans? They seem to kind of tiptoe around that. And you mentioned earlier how, it's been 20 years since there's been an ad about women's rights, or not women's rights, but with abortion issues and stuff like that. Can you kind of elaborate on that?
Well, most candidates, avoid things in their ads that are going to be, controversial. So they'll avoid things. Now, really, in this last election cycle, there was a lot of paid-to entitlement programs, primarily to get people afraid that the Republicans were going to cut them. What I didn't show you tonight, but I think most of you know here, is that the older you are, the bigger percentage of you turn out to vote. And so certainly senior citizens are a very important constituency every election cycle. So there was some talk, I think, about not cutting Medicaid and Medicare and Social Security, and those ads were typically in Democratic ads. I don't remember a lot about defense. I think there were some. That's typically a Republican issue, and it could end up in some of their ads, I think. Steph, do you remember that?
I thought you were talking about things like leather fetish or something like that never came up in the campaign at all. I don't remember a single candidate talking about it. Maybe in San Francisco, but the thing is that the Republicans did actually in the primary season talk a lot about Social Security and reforming Medicare, and it turned out to be a catastrophic disaster because you don't really essentially restructure an entire social system in the middle of a campaign. It's the worst time to do it because it triggers a reaction in people who are scared by it, and the Democrats did a pretty good job of using scare tactics to frighten people who thought that the Republicans were about to cut them off from their Social Security and Medicare. Defense is a third rail. Nobody wants to really touch it, and you notice that now they're talking about going back and looking at the current cuts, the 10% cuts across the board. They're talking about sort of rejiggling it, and one of the things they're talking about is putting more money back into the defense budget because, that is, when you look at trust in institutions, which is something Gallup poll has done for the last 50 years, I guess, or whatever. There is one institution in the United States that has the lowest rating in trust in institutions. Do you know what that is? My students should know that from my class, although Congress, right? Yeah, Congress. What's the highest one, highest trust in an institution? It's the military. So, it's a very, very difficult thing to do.
Okay, a couple more questions back here. Take you first and then you.
From what you showed us, it seems like there was almost $3 billion spent in the last election, and you say that's going to double. Is there any talks of making presidential elections public funded, so the money is equal across the board and it's almost equal exposure?
It's been a very difficult thing in this country to do because it really goes back not just to Citizens United, but to a Supreme Court case, I believe it was in the 1980s or 70s, Vallejo versus Buckley, which said money was speech. And so it's a long tradition in this country. There has been talks about reforming elections. It really hasn't gotten anywhere on the national level. There's been some reforms in Congress. The last one was McCain-Feingold, but there really hasn't been much since then. I don't see it going that way. There is some statewide efforts. There was one in Minnesota a couple years ago. In the Senate race in Massachusetts, they tried to limit outside funding in that race, the Scott Brown, Elizabeth Warren race. But it almost needs to almost come voluntarily, either on the statewide level. But I just don't see a lot of efforts in that way because, the reason is that the politicians are being elected today are being elected in the current system, which is a system that has a lot of money in it. So I just don't see us. There is some public funding. What's happened is that the candidates in the last couple of years haven't accepted public funding, which means that they can have as much money as they want. They're limited when they accept public funds. I think McCain was the last one that accepted public funds.
And Democrats often favor campaign finance reform and spending less, and they're often very angry because Barack Obama said, I'm not going to go that direction because it's a sure way to lose an election. Because if you're playing against someone else who is, let's say, heavily armed, and you're saying, well, I'm not going to be heavily armed, you're at a disadvantage. And money is weapons in the campaign, especially if you have to buy sophisticated people who can do data mining and media and set up a huge shop in Chicago that is, populated by very expensive programmers and other people and run ads and organize the grassroots. That's very expensive, and especially in a presidential election. This is an enormous country. You can have campaign finance reform and limit the campaigns in little tiny countries like Luxembourg and Belgium. This is not Luxembourg and Belgium. The United States is enormous, and it would be very, very difficult to run a campaign on a small, lean budget, so nobody wants to touch it. I don't see it happening, not in my lifetime.
Mine was just mostly, it was with relation to that, just with the campaign costs, but you've already covered most of it. But I was just going to ask, do you foresee any caps in private funding along with that? But you pretty much covered most of that.
Well, right now, there has been some efforts in Congress to have, they're having they want to have a constitutional amendment to overturn, or something to overturn Citizens United to cap. So, it'd have to be coming that way. I've seen some efforts, and every once in a while I get an online petition to sign something like that, but I don't really think it's going to go anywhere. There could be something that would come before the Supreme Court in subsequent years, and a different court might, limit what's been happening under Citizens United. But I think it would have to take that. I think it would come from the court system, the Supreme Court.
Okay, 53% of the electorate were women. Where are the questions from the female students? No? Okay, out there. Here's a challenge. Come on. 53%. Where are you?
There's some of my students over there. What did they do?
Back there?
Yeah.
Okay, well.
In the humorous vein here, I just wonder, with all of this money in politics, are these the candidates, the best ones we can buy with that money?
Question.
After everything we said tonight, I actually do think that we have a lot of good people running for office. I think both Mitt Romney and President Obama were decent candidates. They're intelligent. I think they were both, had, a lot of, I think they were both intelligent men, very committed to their families. I think they were good. They certainly had a different vision of America. I think that Romney was made to run much more to the right than he was probably comfortable running. But I do think that we get a lot of good candidates. I think through the vetting process, we actually had two intelligent, well-qualified people running.
Well, the other answer is that you can't force people to run, and so if you have somebody in mind with a Nobel Prize and so on, they probably are not dumb enough to want to run for president because it's a job that no one can win. Your hair turns gray after the first 4 years. You end your second term having fixed almost nothing, and piled on a whole bunch of new things that you really didn't expect, like Hugo Chavez dying. And so it's a job for very few people, and those are the people who end up running and getting elected. Self-selection, really.
So we'll take one more question, and then we'll wrap it up for the evening.
I know after this election, it's kind of painful to think about, another campaign season coming up here soon. But we're looking forward to 2016 already. And one of the big nominees that the Republicans are talking about, many people are talking about, is Chris Christie, governor of New Jersey. One of his big downfalls, they say, is his working with Obama, especially after Hurricane Sandy. And it almost seems as if bipartisanship is a downfall for a candidate now, working with the other party and not being backed by your own. How do you see this playing out for not only just him, but Marco Rubio working only with his own party and not seeming to want to work with Democrats at all?
Well, I think that is a big thing. I think it's going to be it's going to be more bipartisan when the people in office see that that's an advantage. I've been studying some of the ads of women politicians, both female and male, running this last cycle. And interestingly enough, the female ads I saw for U.S. Senate, be they Republican or Democrats, stressed that they were bipartisan. So that was one thing that women were doing. And certainly we know from research that women do tend to be more collaborative when they get into office. But I think it's not going to happen. The bipartisanship's not going to happen until voters demand it. And you see in polling that's what they want, but it doesn't seem to be going anywhere right now. And so one of the things that it's too much to talk about tonight, but part of this whole problem that we have right now in D.C. is the gerrymandered districts that we have at the U.S. House level, where, Iowa, for those of you who have not lived anywhere else, we have a very fair system here of redistricting, but that's not in every other state. And so, for example, I was recently talking in Texas, and they told me that the city of Austin, which is actually Democratic, is split into something like 16 slices, so it's really all Republican because it just has a few Democrats in it. So that's what's going on right now. Both Democrats and Republicans have to worry about being primaried, and so they're not so much worried about getting along in Congress, they're worried about getting elected again, which means that they're worried about having, if you're a Republican, someone more right than you run, and if you're a Democrat, being challenged, I guess, on the right or the left. And so they're just really, protecting. Something has to happen to make them want to do bipartisan legislation.
I agree with that. And on the other hand, Chris Christie has a very compelling personality. Yeah. He is unique. He says what he thinks. He doesn't mind offending. And I have a feeling that even if CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Committee, doesn't want him speaking to them, there are huge numbers of Republicans who want someone running for president who can appeal to independent voters and maybe some Democrats, and who can actually get elected president. Because the Republicans have done very badly getting someone elected for president, and they need to fix that. So I wouldn't be surprised if Chris Christie bulldozes his way, which would be easy for him to do, given his size and strength, into the primaries if he comes to Iowa. He has a huge number of very wealthy supporters in Iowa who'd like to see him run. And remember, things start in Iowa, and I think they'll still start in 2016. So I wouldn't discount him. I think maybe having the extreme wing of the Republican Party reject him may actually be an asset.
Okay, so we'll all stay tuned for 2016. If you have a little bit of time, if you have a few more questions, we have some refreshments there at the back, so stay around, visit with us a little bit. Thank you all for coming, and please join me in thanking our two speakers, Diane Bastrom and Steph.
Thank you. 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 Thank you.